Please welcome New York Times best-selling author and special advisor to ASU, Jeff Selingo.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chicago. How is everyone feeling today? Yeah, great. It's great to be with you here today. I am going to be taking questions today, so please think of the questions as during my talk today, and I will be taking a few questions at the end. It's great to be with you here today. I want to start by talking about my first real job interview after college. It was in Wilmington, North Carolina, at the newspaper there. I flew in on a Friday afternoon. The managing editor picked me up, and we went to lunch in downtown Wilmington. Then we got back into his car for what I thought was going to be the drive back to the newsroom. And after a couple of minutes, he pulled over to the side of the road. He handed me a notebook and a pen, and he said, "Go find a story, get back to the newsroom, and file it by 5 p.m. Then he took off. So here I was on the side of a road in a town I had never been to before. This is 1995. Many of you remember 1995. No such thing as Uber. No such thing as the iPhone, no such thing as Google Maps. Heck, I didn't even have a cell phone with me. But I went out, I found the story, I got back to the newsroom, I filed it, and a few minutes before 5 o'clock, I walked into the editor's office, and I was all smiles. I was ready because I thought, I got this job. And he said, "Good job," and he turned around and looked right back at his computer. And I let out an audible sigh, clearly, because he turned back around, and he said, "You know, Jeff," he said, "I give this assignment to everybody I interview. The real assignment was your reaction when I dropped you off on the side of that road." He said, "Some people sit in the car and they ask a million questions. Others ask for specific story ideas. Others do what you did and they get out and they go and do it. And one person never came back. Hopefully they went to look for that person." But then he said something to me that I'll never forget. He said, "The reason I give this assignment is that every day in this job is going to be different. You're not going to have a syllabus to tell you what to do. You're going to have to navigate ambiguity, and you're going to have to do things you're not asked to do in this job." I got the job, by the way, and I never will forget what he told me that day, because in many ways, confronting the unknown every day, tolerating ambiguity, is not only a necessary skill for journalists, it's a skill we all need in a world being reshaped by artificial intelligence and automation. Not since the dawn of the Industrial Revolution and the information age that followed have we seen the scale of disruption now taking place in the workforce. Indeed, the world of work, we see it probably every day on our campuses, is undergoing a massive shift. The skills needed to keep up in any job are increasingly churning at a faster rate. Indeed, a third of the skills in all jobs, in the average job, are being disrupted today. Now, this is very similar to what's happened in other disruptions in the history of the world. We've seen this in the Industrial Revolution. We've seen this in the digital revolution. But each time, more education enables people to kind of get through that social pain that ended up coming right after these periods of disruption, and then we went on to great prosperity. It was all because of education. Education was the superpower that fueled the change in our world. In other words, more education meant better jobs. And for generations, we've followed this formula. We went to school, we got a degree, and that equaled our job. It was very transactional, and it was very linear. We went to school at the age of 5, we went to college at the age of 18, we graduated, maybe we went to graduate school, we got that degree, and then we had a job, in some cases, a job for the rest of our lives. It was also centered on the institution. We went to a physical schoolhouse, a school, a high school, a physical college campus. Now, that linear formula is shifting. It's subtle, but it's an incredibly important shift for all of us in this room, because it's going to shift how we prepare are skilling workers, including 18 to 22-year-old traditional college students. It's also going to include how we're going to upskill and reskill a generation of workers who are being displaced now by automation and artificial intelligence. But I also think this shift in how we think about learning is going to revive trust and the value in education as engines of economic mobility. Now, what we're shifting towards is a new learning economy. And this is what I want to focus on in my talk today, on what will become this new learning economy. It's not going to be as institutional-centered, as I'm going to tell you about in a minute. Instead, it's going to be focused on all of us as individuals. It will mean that learning will happen in a variety of formats, in a variety of places, anytime, anywhere. It means you will get skills as you need them to move ahead in life, not necessarily always following a standard curriculum that everybody follows. And why is this? Because when we add education and skills together, it recognizes that we're going to have multiple jobs, in many cases, multiple careers over our lifetime. The old formula was centered kind of in the Industrial Revolution. It was very centralized. Again, we came to a central place, a school, a college campus. It was in many ways like factory learning. And the problem now is that schools and colleges can no longer keep up with the demands of the 21st century. The model of higher education and education that we have today, it's this very traditional model. It's not only expensive, but it's also scarce. At a time when more people around the world need higher education than ever before, we don't have enough room at some places for this demand. Too many people need education, and as a result, we need broad access to it. Now, don't get me wrong. It doesn't mean that traditional schoolhouses and high schools and colleges are going away. This does not mean the end of the institution. Colleges and universities won't disappear, and in fact, new colleges and universities will still be built. But they're going to be part of a larger ecosystem of learning, where the individual, rather than the institution, is driving the process. In many ways, individualized learning is going to be the newest natural resource that is sought after by countries around the world. If we think about this in history, this shift is part of a centuries-long shift we have seen in education. Let's just go back a century ago, when the high school movement was born in the early 1900s, when we thought going to school just until 8th grade was not enough, and so communities around the US added high school. And it's why, post-World War II, returning GIs were able to go to college, because in the 30 years between 1900 and 1940, we had created these high schools all around the country. And then, a half century later, the space race launched, and technology was integrated into every part of our life. And we decided, 12 or 13 years are not enough. And so the College for All movement was born in the 1960s. And the result, not only in the US, but around the world, was higher education for all. The growth in higher education around the world is just really amazing to me. In 1900, only 1 in 100 people around the world were enrolled in any sort of post-secondary education. By the year 2000, it was 1 in 5. We went from 1 in 100 to 1 in 5. And now, there's a need for a new movement, one that builds on the high school movement of the 1900s, one that builds on that college movement that we saw during the 1960s, and that is the new learning economy. Now, what is this new learning economy? For one, it's lifelong. It's much more flexible than the one-size-that-fits-all that we have today, and it's stackable, meaning that we could take pieces of education throughout our lifetime and stack them on top of one another. Now, why do we need this? Why do we need a new way of thinking about learning in the 21st century? The typical narrative you're reading now about AI and automation is that it's both creating jobs and destroying jobs. I think that's a pretty simple narrative that is in many ways incorrect. The reality is that every job is being impacted in some way. Burning Glass and BGI call this the great disruption in skills, right? More than 1/3 of the top 20 skills considered necessary for the average job have changed since 2016. More than 1/3 of the top 20 skills necessary for the average job since 2016. 1 in 5 skills is brand new. Now, some sectors are changing faster than others. Information technology, marketing and public relations, human resources, and sales. Big thing here I know at Salesforce, right? Employers are looking for a diverse set of skills that no one major or no one discipline can actually fulfill. We can't fulfill what is needed in today's job market by just individual majors. The traditional kind of linear packaged educational experience can't keep up with the demands of the modern workforce today. In many ways, it's similar to what's happening in TV, music, and movies in terms of how we need to consume education in the future. You know, I've been traveling a lot the last couple of weeks, so I'm kind of binge watching and catching up to the rest of my family for what they're watching. I've been watching The Night Agent on Netflix, and so I binge watched that on the way here yesterday. And my kids, you know, I have 2 teenage daughters at home. They don't really understand how my wife and I, we're both Gen Xers, used to consume television when you couldn't just watch it whenever you wanted to, right? We're in a revolution now on how we consume TVs, music, and movies that my kids just don't appreciate. If you remember, for those of us who grew up in the 70s and 80s, there was this thing called shelf space in television. And if you were a programmer, you had a program what went on television, network television between 8 p.m. and 11 p.m. each night. You only had so much space in that, and you couldn't move it. My kids don't understand, well, what if you missed the show at 8 o'clock on Thursday night? Well, you have to wait for the repeats or syndication. That was totally over their head. And then, of course, this thing called the VCR came along, and if you could figure out how to program it, you were lucky to watch that program later on. But there were just so many hours in the week that needed to be programmed, and radio was the same. There was this idea of shelf space. And now the concept of shelf space, whether it's in television, music, movies, has been transformed from streaming, right? There is no concept of shelf space. We now can put as much content out there as we want, and it could be consumed as people want to consume it, whether they want to consume it one at a time or all at once. We are no longer held captive to that schedule of Thursday nights at 8 o'clock and by time. And in many ways, the same thing is happening in this new learning economy too. We're no longer captured by the calendar and by time. When I described how my wife and I used to watch television to my kids, where we had to show up at a specific time, you know what their response was? It's like school, right? We have to show up at a certain moment of every day and every year. These are the attributes of the new learning economy. It's going to be much more flexible, outcome-based, where work and learning is going to be much more combined than it is today. And in fact, I think the tension on our campuses that has been evident around the humanities and sciences are now going to be around academic learning and hands-on learning and experiential learning. That's going to be the next phase as we think about this new learning economy. And I know where a lot of us are thinking about where AI fits into all this. AI is at the end of that list because it will enable everything above it. The advantage of AI, in my opinion, is where it learns from the experiences of your students and of your faculty, and it unleashes the latent knowledge that is in your faculty and students. I want to talk about 3 critical elements of this new learning economy: skills, optionality, and credentials. So when we think about skills, And when we think about the pathway through education, it used to be that if you went to a particular college and got a degree in a particular major, you were probably pretty much set after college. And we know from the data that the more selective, more brand name college you go to, the more likely you would make more money over the course of your lifetime. And if you majored in certain disciplines, like STEM, for example, you would make more money over the course of your lifetime. Now, if you work at a college or university, those are two really hard levers to change. It's hard to move the brand and the brand position of your university, and it's really also hard to tell students to major in certain things so that their outcomes are better. But here's where we can help our students have better outcomes, and that is with skills. This is the lever that we can move and embed more skills in our degrees so that students have even better outcomes in this fast-changing economy. Now, what do I mean by skills? First are what are called the foundational skills. Now, when you hear the word foundational skills, you're probably thinking, oh, the soft skills, right? The ability to communicate, the ability to work in teams, the ability to problem solve. Very critical, right? Those are the human skills that every employer wants today, but it goes beyond those soft skills. It's a broader range of skills across domains. Now, while each of these skills are valuable on their own, my research that I've done over the last year with the Burning Glass Institute shows that if we develop these skills across these different domains up here, the human skills, the digital building blocks, the business enablers, what ends up happening is that students get the opportunity to both earn more, that's the red line up there, as well as have more job mobility, both within their organizations and outside their organizations. And why this is important is that the degree itself is no longer good enough for a lot of students who need to have some of these very specific skills, not only to make more money, but to have more mobility within the organization and eventually, if they want to move up and out of that organization. Now, these are the foundational skills. There's also specialized skills, skills that are much more specialized to the job that you're going to hold. And these are much more concentrated in certain jobs. Now, we used to think, when you look at this list of skills, we used to think those skills were embedded in the degrees. They weren't things that employers called out specifically. Employers still see the degree as a sign of discipline. So even though you might be reading, well, all these employers are advertising jobs that don't require a college degree, when you actually look at the data about who's getting hired, they're still hiring people with a college degree. But there's a but after that. They like the college degree because it shows, again, a sign of discipline. But what they really want to know is, do you have the specific skills to do this job? And the question is, how, as higher education leaders, do we communicate these skills? You know, I'm thinking of things like Tableau and Adobe and Salesforce. All of these special skills, project management, communication, these are things that can give students a 10, 20, 30% salary premium in some ways. I met a student recently who graduated both with an undergraduate and graduate degree from a pretty prestigious place, was having trouble getting a job, worked for his mother's nonprofit over the summer using, and I'm not just saying this because I'm here, Salesforce. He was able to get some certificates around that, put it on his resume, and that helped him get the job. And when he talked to his hiring manager about it, and he said, well, what happened? Why I was having trouble getting a job 6 months ago. He said, the degree matters, but it's the specific skill that you knew what we needed to do right now was critical. And so one of the more interesting experiments I see happening in higher education now is happening at the University of Texas system, where they're starting to embed specific skills in different degree programs. So for example, a history major who has a data visualization certificate that can actually help them move the needle on getting that job. Or think about analytics. Data analytics embedded into marketing managers would give them a 25% bump in salary if they have data analytics that go along with that marketing major. Now, data analytics obviously is a hot field now, and there's demand for data science in many fields, not just marketing. And this is not a talk about data science, but the numbers illustrate how just one skill can make a difference no matter the degree. Now, where are you going to learn those skills? Now, you might need to go to college, obviously, to learn those skills, but it's not going to necessarily look the same as it does today. The second critical piece of this new learning economy is what I call optionality in how we learn, and it finally recognizes that as humans, we all have different learning styles. You know, for me, I learn best when I see a concept and I'm able to apply it in real time. A couple months ago, I live in Washington, D.C., and it was supposed to snow. We don't get a lot of snow anymore. I have a snowblower that my parents bought me a long time ago, and it not the greatest thing, but it couldn't get it started. So I didn't have enough time to actually send it off to a shop to get repaired, so here was Jeff trying to repair it himself. Now, my wife will tell you I'm not a very good repair person, but pulled up YouTube, watched a couple of videos, diagnosed the problem. There was a problem with the starter, went off to the hardware store, got the supplies I needed, watched the videos again, and fixed it. Took me probably many more hours than it would take a qualified repair person, but I was able to do it. Watch and learn at the same time. And in many ways, the same thing is going to happen in this new learning economy where students have this optionality to learn on their own time. We're already seeing it. Just like our listening habits are shifting on the radio, from radio to streaming, so are the habits in how we are learning. More than half of students now in the US take at least one course online. A couple of years ago, we took our podcast, Future You, out to UCLA, and we did a town hall meeting, and Gene Block, the former chancellor of UCLA, we asked him, what was the biggest impact of the pandemic? And he said, the biggest impact was when students came back to campus, they were so used to taking online courses, they came back and they looked at the course catalog and they said, I want to take that class in person, I want to take that class online, and I want to take that class in a hybrid format. They wanted more flexibility that they have in every other part of their life. To watch a movie in person, to watch a movie streaming, to binge watch television, to listen to music as they do, to shop in person or online. They wanted that same flexibility. You heard in the intro, I'm a special advisor and professor of practice at Arizona State University. We're 57% now of on-campus residential students. So these are students who are living on campus, take at least one course online. Another third of them take a hybrid course. So that means 9 out of 10 students who are on campus are taking some form of online courses, giving them that flexibility to do other things. Some of them have to work to pay for college, but also think that gives them a chance to do undergraduate research, internships, other sort of experiential learning when we give them that flexibility. Finally, this optionality will also extend to how we measure learning and the credential that we are giving to students. You know, in the US, we have measured learning kind of since the early 1900s based on an analog model of education that was really rooted in the Industrial Revolution, right? You would show up to a physical location, that school that my kids talk about all the time. You would sit at a specific time. You would sit in a seat. You would do a certain amount of lecture time. You would do a certain amount of homework. And we all know what that equals, that all-important credit hour. And then we add up 120 of those credit hours to get the bachelor degree. In many ways, the credit hour is no different than that shelf space that I was talking about earlier with television. How much do we have to fill to get that 120 credits? It was a fixed amount of time. Some students could go faster, some students needed to go slower. It didn't matter. There was a fixed amount of time. Now, just like in the Industrial Revolution, our economy is undergoing a transformation. And this time, we're moving from an analog to a digital economy. Now, factories and schools in the industrial economy, they focused on a common process that everybody followed, a curriculum in schools. Time was fixed, and so was teaching, but the outcomes were variable. We know that not everybody graduates from high school. 50% of students don't complete college in 4 years. And that's unfortunate that the outcomes were variable. But in a digital economy, we're focused much more on the outcomes. And so in education, that outcome is learning. The seat time can actually be variable. What's most important is the mastery of the content. And this new learning economy allows for much more individualized learning, since not everybody will have to follow this same narrow pathway through life, school, work, and then eventually retirement. Rather, the new learning economy offers us kind of continuous learning where there's this continuum where learners could come on and off when they need to learn what they need when they need to. It really offers us the chance for lifelong learning, true lifelong learning. Now, what excites me most, I've been talking about lifelong learning for quite some time now, but what excites me most is when we marry this with, I think, the power of AI, the ability to unleash new models for higher ed. And what worries me most about the current rhetoric around AI, besides the fact that we still call it cheating when it isn't, what really worries me now about the current rhetoric around AI is it's all around efficiency and not transformation. It really reminds me of 1995. So before I went to Wilmington, North Carolina to work, I was working in Phoenix, Arizona as a technology reporter in the summer of 1995. This is one of my stories. It was about how everybody was going on the web in 1995. Every company out there, including, by the way, Southwest Airlines was the first airline on the web, but you couldn't make a reservation online. You could just look at the timetable, and then you still had to call on the phone to make a reservation, because that's how we saw the internet. The internet was just one big library of information. It was a tool. It was a library, a tool. But think about what has happened since then, how the internet has transformed everything that we do, how we shop, how we learn, how we get information. We now know that the internet was this transformative tool in how we learn and work. And the same thing is what we have to think about AI, right? We really should be focused on ways to rethink how we do things so we can take advantage of the tasks that AI does well, instead of it being just yet another tool that we're deploying. We really need to think about how it can transform what we're doing. Think about this, right? This is our student experience on many of our campuses. All those interactions that students have, just think about what those interactions would be like on an AI-enabled campus. In many ways, this is another lesson of the Industrial Revolution that it could teach us, right? It's not like during the Industrial Revolution, every manufacturer just decided to keep its production and quality the same, even though they had this thing called a steam engine that can change their process, scale their companies, and keep quality perhaps even better. And in many ways, the same thing is happening now with AI. How can we think of it as much more of a transformative tool rather than just as an efficiency hack as we're thinking about it today? And that's what I hope you can bring back to your campuses as you think about what can we change about that student experience, because it is going to change. Higher education is like any other ecosystem. It grows, it releases, it comes back into new life forms. Every ecosystem goes through this life cycle. Some of them are longer than others. I believe that the higher ed ecosystem that we live in today is one that was created right after the Higher Education Act was signed by President Johnson in the late 1960s. And we have lived through that period. We're now in a period of conservation. But if we were moving from stability into release, reconfiguration, and growth, and if we think what we're doing now is organizing the conservation period that we're in, we're not seeing this whole cycle. This whole cycle will capture, when we get back up into the growth, will capture the demand for higher education that is around the world. And this is where I want to end today. I know the headlines about higher ed right now are pretty darn negative, but the thing that makes me bullish about the future of higher education is that around the world, there is more demand for education than we can supply today. More demand for education than we can supply today. As a result, I think the road ahead is both an extraordinary opportunity, but also an extraordinary challenge. Just like when I was left on the side of the road in Wilmington, North Carolina, all those years ago, I knew what the assignment was, I just didn't know how to get there. This is our assignment. This is our assignment to close these gaps of education, not only here in the US, but around the world. That's a huge challenge. And the question is, how do we make our institutions part of this new learning economy where we empower individuals to fill that expectation gap? So where do we go from here? How can we act on this when we go back to our campuses? One is consider who your learners are, or who they could be. You know, in this new learning economy, you don't just have one or two segments of students, you have multiple segments that can be served by a variety of players, not just colleges and universities. In fact, 50% of credentials today are given by non-higher education institutions. So how are you going to compete to win those students? Second is the student experience. How can you reimagine the student experience to appeal to that 18-year-old Gen Zer who wants the flexibility and hands-on learning, as well as the 52-year-old alum of your institution who needs to be upskilled for the next stage of their life? And then finally, how can we think about AI not just as a productivity hack, but to start to really learn how do our students manage through this campus? What is the knowledge in our faculty and staff? And how can we take what is embedded? There's so much information on our college campuses. And how can we unleash that latent knowledge that is embedded in students and faculty to improve that student experience? Thank you for your time today. It was wonderful to be with you.